Rain hammered against the thin roof of a technical tent at Fort Sill, Oklahoma, in the spring of 1943. Inside, cables ran across muddy floors, tables were cluttered with radio parts, batteries, and the smell of soldered wires filled the air. A young engineer bent over a map, his hands stained with grease. His name was Lieutenant Harold B. Greer, a radar technician from the U.S. Army Signal Corps. He pointed at a circle of small black dots drawn across a trench line. "If we place microphones here," he said, "we can hear the enemy's artillery and calculate their position by measuring the delay between each sound." An older officer, a veteran of North Africa, leaned back and laughed. "Sound? We don't fight wars with ears, son. The enemy won't wait for you to listen." Laughter spread across the tent. The young man's proposal was brushed aside, his report stamped impractical, not field-worthy. Greer said nothing. Outside, thunder cracked like distant gunfire. He stood at the tent entrance, staring into the rain, watching droplets ripple across puddles. Every impact was a sound wave, every echo a coordinate. In that moment, he realized the battlefield was already speaking. Men just hadn't learned how to listen. That night, long after others had gone to sleep, Greer returned to his table. He connected microphones to a primitive timing device, measuring how long it took sound to travel across 20 meters of wet ground. He scribbled numbers in his notebook. Temperature 20 degrees. Sound delay 0.059 seconds. Possible triangulation. Somewhere outside, a truck backfired, and he instinctively glanced at the stopwatch. His hand trembled. He wasn't building a weapon. He was building a sense. An artificial ear for war. He murmured under his breath, "If I can hear them first, maybe we live." At dawn, the officers awoke to find Greer still there, surrounded by coils of wire, his uniform soaked through. No one laughed this time. The storm had passed, and over the field, faint echoes of practice shells rolled through the gray sky like a reminder. Every explosion had a birthplace, waiting to be found. "In war," he wrote in his journal that morning, "no idea is stupid if it saves a life." If you value stories like this, don't forget to like and subscribe. It helps preserve forgotten chapters of history. Tell us in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. History feels closer when we share the same hour. Across Europe in 1943 and 1944, American artillery crews fought in blindness. When enemy shells rained down, they could not see where the fire came from. Only the flashes on distant ridges, too brief and too far away to track. They answered back with guesses. Every map was scarred with question marks. Every barrage was a gamble. At dawn in the Italian hills, fog settled thick as wool over the guns. Captain Joseph McNair's battery fired 30 rounds toward a valley where they believed a German battery hid. Nothing answered but silence. A corporal spat into the mud. "We're fighting ghosts again," he said. Shells often struck farms, empty fields, or woods long abandoned by the enemy. Reports from the front read the same line again and again. Counter-fire ineffective due to lack of observation. In some divisions, over 1 in 4 artillery casualties came from unseen German guns. Harold Greer saw this helplessness firsthand during his field visits. He walked among men who slept beside their guns, their faces hollow from exhaustion. He watched them squint into smoke, searching for something they could not find. "You can't hit what you can't see," a gunner told him, cleaning his weapon with shaking hands. Greer only nodded. He knew that sentence was killing them one battle at a time. He spent the following nights drawing diagrams on scraps of ration paper, calculating sound speeds at varying humidity, testing how terrain distorted echoes. Soldiers who passed by his tent joked that he was the man trying to hear through the earth. He took the name quietly. In his notes, he wrote, "A shell's scream has a birthplace. If one can follow it backward, there lies the enemy." During an exercise near Nettuno, he asked a sergeant to count the seconds between flash and impact. The delay was 4.5 seconds. Greer whispered a number, then walked 50 paces and placed a marker. Hours later, when aerial scouts returned, they confirmed it. A German gun pit lay less than 30 yards from his guess. The officers still doubted him. They called it coincidence. But the men who had lived through the blind barrages began to believe. "Maybe he's got a point," said Sergeant Riley in his diary. "Maybe we don't need eyes. Maybe ears will do." Every night, Greer sat by his equipment, listening to the thunder of distant guns roll across valleys. Each boom was a clue, a coordinate, a chance to turn fear into precision. When eyes failed, he thought, ears could still see. Night fell heavy over the testing ground near Aberdeen Proving Ground, Maryland. The rain came in waves, steady and cold, drumming on crates of equipment lined along the mud. Floodlights flickered. A handful of engineers worked in silence, their boots sinking deep into the ground. Among them was Greer, soaked through, his uniform caked in clay. He was laying cables, hundreds of meters of them, across the field, connecting microphones one by one. Each post had to be precisely measured, each cable pinned to a steel stake. He carried no weapon, only a spade, a hammer, and his notes sealed in a plastic sleeve. "You really think you'll hear a gun 10 kilometers away?" a sergeant asked, shouting over the wind. Greer didn't answer. He was counting seconds under his breath. When the last wire was buried, he crouched beside a wooden box, a prototype timing unit the size of a small radio. He attached the wires, twisted the knobs, and waited. On the small glass dial of the oscilloscope, a green line hummed faintly. The field was empty. No one spoke. Then, in the distance, a flash. A fraction later, the ground trembled. The green line jumped. Greer's heart pounded. He wrote down the delay, 4.27 seconds. Then he ran to the next station, compared the time, and drew two intersecting lines on the map. The point of contact marked a spot on the far ridge. "Mark that coordinate," he shouted. "That's where they fired." The other engineers hesitated, drenched and shivering. Then came a second explosion, closer this time. The oscilloscope jumped again, and the coordinates matched perfectly. Greer's voice broke through the storm. "We got it." For a moment, no one moved. Then, as realization hit, one man clapped him on the shoulder. The rest followed, laughter mixing with the roar of the rain. What had been mockery a month ago now felt like a miracle. That night, at 02:10 hours, Greer's notes read, "First confirmed detection, distance 9.6 kilometers, error margin less than 100 meters. It works." Mud dripped from his sleeve as he closed the notebook. For the first time in months, he smiled. In the middle of a storm, soaked to the bone, a single man had given the American Army a new sense: the ability to hear through darkness. By early 1944, the sound plots from Greer's system began spreading through artillery units in England, preparing for D-Day. Inside a canvas command post near Portsmouth, maps were laid across tables under dim red light. Circles drawn in pencil overlapped like ripples in water, each representing a time delay from a different microphone array. Where the circles crossed, that was the source of enemy fire. Greer stood beside Captain Riley, explaining how it worked. "Each sound has a fingerprint," he said, tapping the chart. "The further the microphone from the blast, the longer the delay. Plot 3 of them, and the intersection gives the gun's position to within 50 meters. Riley stared at the lines. "And you can do that faster than a spotter plane?" "Faster than smoke clears," Greer replied. When the invasion came, the true test arrived. June 9th, 1944, near Carentan, German 88s. Opened up on the 83rd Infantry Division's approach roads. Shells landed among convoys, igniting trucks and wounding dozens. The air was thick with dust and fear. Then, from a small trailer hidden behind hedgerows, Greer's device came alive. Operators listened through static, eyes locked on flickering needles. Reading 1, delay 2.7 seconds. Reading 2, 3.1 seconds. 6 seconds. Reading 3, 2.9. Within 40 seconds, coordinates were on the map. Riley barked an order. "Range 7,200 yards, fire for effect." 6 American howitzers swung their barrels toward the unseen ridge. The first volley landed. Seconds later, a plume of orange burst from the enemy line, a direct hit. German return fire ceased. Greer's face was pale but calm. "That's them," he said simply. In his logbook, the entry was short. Enemy battery neutralized. Time to locate, 47 seconds. Word spread quickly. What soldiers had called that stupid science project became a legend whispered through gun crews. The sound ranging sections were assigned new designations: Field Artillery Sound and Flash Battalions, equipped with improved equipment and radar support. Each unit could cover a front up to 10 miles wide, plotting up to 40 enemy gun positions per day. Their efficiency shocked even the high command. One general wrote in his report, "Mathematics now kills faster than gunpowder." Around the evening fire, a sergeant once joked, So, the pencil men finally saved our hides. But there was no sarcasm left in his tone, only gratitude. As shells fell silent over Carentan that night, Greer stood by his tent, listening not to victory cheers, but to the strange quiet that followed destruction. The lines on his map had become real lives saved, invisible threads between science and survival. By the autumn of 1944, the U.S. Army had formalized its new tool into specialized sound-ranging sections. Their operators, mathematicians, engineers, radiomen, and gunners, carried microphones instead of rifles. They lived behind the lines, often unseen, listening through static for the pulse of distant guns. Their nickname soon became the Listeners. Every night when the front fell quiet, they unrolled coils of wire through forests and fields, sometimes under sniper fire. The microphones were planted in the ground like seeds, connected to a central post filled with oscilloscopes, amplifiers, and grease-stained logbooks. They were, quite literally, the ears of the Army. Private Arthur Neal, who joined the 33rd Sound Ranging Battalion near Nancy, France, described it in his letters home. "We don't see the war, we hear it. Every battery has its own voice. You can tell an 88 from a 105 by the crack. It's strange. You start to recognize them, like people in the dark. Each sound became a pattern, a signature. Operators learned to distinguish by instinct, the sharper thunder of German field guns, the heavier rhythm of railway artillery, the hollow echo of mortars fired in valleys. They plotted their findings on transparent film, tracing fine pencil lines that converged into a deadly truth, where the next strike would come from. When the Battle of the Bulge began in December, the Ardennes was buried in snow. Visibility dropped to zero. Aircraft were grounded. Yet the sound sections remained awake, wrapped in blankets beside humming generators. Their instruments glowed faint green in the darkness. They could hear what no one could see. A captain entered one night, exhausted, shouting, "They're shelling our right flank. We need coordinates." Within 60 seconds, 3 operators triangulated the location. Counterfire followed within minutes. The shelling stopped. The captain looked at them as if they were magicians. Reports from that winter recorded that counter-battery efficiency rose by nearly 70% in sectors equipped with sound ranging and radar support. For once, American gunners were no longer blind. Greer, now promoted to major, visited the Ardennes front in January 1945. He watched his former prototypes in action, now compact, mobile, refined. He smiled quietly as he read the new code names stenciled on the trailer. Earth Ear. To him, it was more than an invention. It was proof that the act of listening could be as lethal as firing. He wrote in his notebook that night, "We've stopped listening for survival. We're listening for understanding. Every sound tells us we're not to die." The snow fell heavier, covering the microphones like soft shrouds. Beneath them, the earth still hummed, and the listeners waited for the next whisper of thunder. By early 1945, as Germany's lines began collapsing, the stupid idea had grown into a classified network of innovation. What started with Greer's microphone cables now linked radar, acoustics, and even aerial reconnaissance into one coordinated hunting system. Yet behind the success came a new kind of battle, one fought not on muddy fields, but in laboratories and offices. In Washington, officials at the Signal Corps laboratories debated who deserved the credit. British engineers from the War Office claimed they had developed sound ranging first. American physicists countered with test logs proving Greer's work predated the Allied joint project. Reports piled high with stamps marked confidential, duplicate, unverified. The quiet engineer whose idea had saved thousands of lives was barely mentioned in official summaries. Meanwhile, in Europe, the men using his system had no time for politics. They just called it Greer's Ears. Soldiers wrote home about how the equipment turned their fear into control. Sergeant Henry Walsh from the 174th Field Artillery scribbled a note on a torn C ration box. "Every time I see that little screen light up, I think of the man who made it. Tell him thanks, whoever he is." Back home, newspaper editors struggled to describe the technology without violating secrecy rules. One article in Stars and Stripes hinted vaguely, "New U.S. system locates enemy guns before they fire." It never said how. Greer didn't care. What mattered to him were the men. During a field inspection near Trier, he found one of his old prototypes. Wires frayed, casing dented, the nameplate half worn away. The operator saluted and said, "Sir, this one's got 20 confirmed kills." Greer placed a hand on the muddy box and whispered, "She's done her duty." Behind victory reports, smaller truths remained untold. Rivalries between labs, missed patents, arguments over funding. One colonel accused Greer's team of stealing radar resources. Another claimed he delayed more vital research. None of it mattered to the families of soldiers who came home alive because of his machine. When the final push toward the Rhine began, more than 60 field artillery sound-ranging stations were operating across Europe, integrating radar and acoustic triangulation. Together, they turned once blind gunners into precise counter-battery hunters, cutting enemy artillery effectiveness by nearly half. Greer received a modest commendation. No ceremony, no press photo, just a typed letter thanking him for technical contributions of operational significance. He kept it folded inside his field diary until the end of the war. He wrote one last line beneath it: "Every life spared is worth 100 arguments." April 1945. The Rhine was crossed. The German guns were dying out one by one, and silence, something foreign to every soldier's ear, began to return to Europe. For Major Harold Greer, it was both victory and farewell. He stood on a low hill outside Remagen, overlooking a valley that had once shaken every night with artillery fire. Now there was only wind, drifting through broken trees and empty gun pits. His instruments were still set up: a battered oscilloscope, a microphone half buried in mud, wires trailing into the fog. The same gear that once carried the heartbeat of battle now heard nothing at all. Greer knelt beside it, wiped off the dirt, and listened. "Do you hear that?" he asked a young corporal nearby. The soldier frowned. "I don't hear anything, sir." Greer smiled. "Exactly. That's the best sound of all." He wrote in his notebook for the last time, "Enemy batteries silent, our section disbanded. It feels strange to win by hearing nothing." Around him, a few technicians packed equipment into crates bound for the States. Some would end up in universities, others in Cold War laboratories. Out of Greer's crude microphones and analog dials would come new generations of radar: the SCR-584, then early anti-aircraft systems, then counter-mortar sensors in Korea and Vietnam. The chain of innovation that had begun in a muddy tent would reach all the way to spaceborne surveillance decades later. But for now, the engineer who once stood alone in the rain felt small in the silence he had created. He walked down the hill past rows of captured German 88s, their barrels blackened and still. Each gun was frozen mid-gesture, as if caught in the act of surrender. He stopped and placed his hand on the cold steel. "You taught me how to listen," he whispered. "Now you've finally gone quiet." As dusk settled, the last transport truck rumbled away, leaving him alone on the ridge. The breeze carried the faint hum of insects, the first peaceful sound in years. He closed his eyes, letting the wind wash over the emptiness. When peace came officially in May, his invention was just a paragraph in a report. There were no medals, no headlines, but across the front, thousands of men slept that night without hearing a single shell fall. Sometimes, victory isn't the roar of guns. It's the long, uninterrupted silence that follows, the silence men fought so hard to earn. When the guns went silent in 1945, the world forgot the name Harold B. Greer. History often rewards those who command armies, not those who command silence. Yet in a century defined by explosions, his legacy was measured not in the noise he made, but in the lives he kept from ending. Years later, one of his former operators, Arthur Neal, returned home to Kansas. On quiet nights, he still heard faint echoes, not of battle, but of that strange rhythm the earth once carried. He told his grandson, "Every boom had a story, every silence had a cost." The boy never understood, but he remembered the way his grandfather paused before speaking, as if listening for something deep underground. In a declassified report dated 1947, the Army credited acoustic location methods with saving an estimated 15,000 American lives during the European campaigns. It was a single statistic buried among thousands of pages, one that spoke of fear, precision, and the stubborn brilliance of a man once mocked for thinking war could be heard like music. Greer himself left the service quietly, returning to teach engineering at a small college in Ohio. He rarely spoke of his wartime work. Former students remembered him as kind but distant, a A man who sometimes paused mid-lecture, listening to the hum of machines with the calm of someone who'd once heard far worse. In his final letter, found among his papers after his death in 1962, he wrote, "Every invention begins as an argument, but if it helps one soldier return home alive, it's worth all the laughter in the world." Today, his methods are everywhere, in weather radar, in submarine sonar, in the sensors that protect cities from unseen dangers. The same principle that once found German guns in the rain now maps earthquakes beneath oceans and tracks distant storms before they reach our shores. The story of Harold Greer is not about fame or triumph. It is about the quiet persistence of an idea that listening can be more powerful than shouting, that patience can defeat chaos, and that sometimes the truest victory sounds like nothing at all. Somewhere, perhaps, there's still an old microphone buried beneath European soil, rusted and forgotten. It no longer hears war, only wind.